In 2005, my sister walked into the Providence Public Library and never came out. No wreckage, no witnesses, no sound. Just a girl 17 carrying a book bag and a cloth-bound journal swallowed whole by a building full of windows. Her name was Emily Whitlow. For years, I told myself she'd run away, that maybe I'd missed some sign, some cry for help. But 20 years later, when her library book came back, so did everything we tried to bury. Before we go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if stories like this ever brushed past your town or someone you knew, tap like and subscribe. Every voice raised helps pull another truth back into the light. My name's Aaron Whitlow. I'm 39 now. I've spent the last half of my life trying not to remember and the other half trying to forget. Back in 2005, I was a night shift mechanic in Providence, Rhode Island. Small apartment, worn couch, a fridge full of leftover pizza and generic soda. I was 20 at the time. Just me, my little sister Emily, and our Aunt Doris, who'd raised us both since our parents died in a car accident when we were kids. Doris was a retired nurse, sturdy and no-nonsense, the kind who measured worth by whether you put your dishes in the sink. She did her best to hold things together. But after the accident, I think we all went a little quiet inside. Emily, most of all. She was always writing, always reading. She had this way of disappearing into books, like she lived more fully on the page than in the world. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she walked 4 blocks to the Providence Public Library. She had a favorite chair on the 3rd floor, tucked behind the nonfiction stacks near the tall window, and she'd sit there for hours, reading biographies, women no one remembered, writing things down in these tiny journals she hoarded like secrets. At the time, I didn't think much of it. We were both just trying to get through the day. Emily wasn't the kind of kid to cause trouble. She kept her room neat, did her homework, never missed curfew. But around the start of her junior year, I noticed she started staying later. Her eyes were tired. Her hands sometimes shook when she came home like she'd just been somewhere she shouldn't have. One night, we were sitting at the kitchen table. She was picking at a reheated slice of pepperoni pizza. And I remember asking her real quiet, "You okay?" She looked up, paused, then just said, "Yeah, just school." Then went back to writing in her journal like the world wasn't burning behind her eyes. She had this English teacher, Mrs. Rayburn, who she liked a lot. Emily was working on some school project, something about forgotten women in history. Whistleblowers, journalists, women who got buried because they asked the wrong questions. I didn't hear much about it. But I saw the look on her face when she wrote, like she was chasing something that mattered. That last week, everything felt normal. Normal in that way you don't question, because you're too used to grief to recognize a warning. Friday morning, she left for school with her usual bag over her shoulder. I barely saw her. I was running late. She waved goodbye without saying a word. That afternoon, our neighbor, Mrs. Green, said she saw her at the crosswalk, notebook clutched to her chest, looking like she had somewhere important to be. But she never made it home. That night, I stood by the window long after the sun went down, kept telling myself she'd just lost track of time, that maybe her phone had died. I even walked to the library, just stood outside staring at those arched windows like maybe she was still in there just behind the glass. But the doors were locked, and her light was already gone. It was close to midnight when I finally called the police. I'd waited too long, hoping the phone would ring or the door would creak open and I'd see her standing there, half-apologetic notebook clutched to her chest. But the longer I waited, the quieter the apartment felt. I remember standing in the kitchen with the receiver pressed to my ear, staring at the microwave clock like it could somehow fix it. The officer on the other end asked me when I'd last seen her. I said 7:15 that morning. I told him what she was wearing. Told him she had her library bag, her notebook, a scarf with little blue flowers. His voice was calm. He asked if she had a history of running away. I said no, not once. She was 17, a straight-A student, shy, responsible, didn't go to parties, didn't drink. She just read. A lot. He said they'd send someone over in the morning. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in her room trying to piece together her routine. Her journal wasn't on the desk. It wasn't in her school bag or under the pillow. I knew better than to go through her things, but I did anyway. I opened drawers, lifted the mattress, checked the closet. Her shoes were still there, the old Converse with the worn soles, the ones she said were lucky. Her jacket was gone, the one with the deep inside pocket she used to hide library receipts. The walls were covered in photos she'd taken herself. Black and white shots of alleyways, buildings, the side of a church. None of them had people in them. Just space. Emptiness. Like she'd been documenting places no one saw. By the time the officer arrived, the sun was just coming up. His name was Detective Moran. Late 40s, clean-shaven, looked tired even then. He asked to see her room, asked a few basic questions. When I told him she went to the Providence Public Library every Tuesday and Friday, he wrote it down but didn't look surprised. I remember him asking if there was anyone she'd been spending time with, maybe someone older. I shook my head. She barely talked to anyone outside of school. I told him about her project, how she'd been researching women in history who got ignored or erased. He said it was a good topic. Then he asked if she'd ever talked about being afraid of someone. That was when I remembered the night at dinner when her hands were shaking. I told him she'd said something, then just one sentence. I saw something. I hadn't pressed. He looked at me for a long moment and nodded slowly like he'd heard that kind of thing before. The next few days were a blur. They pulled footage from the library's security system. One camera caught her walking in at 3:41 p.m. Friday afternoon. She's wearing her scarf, her bag slung over her shoulder, head down. That was it. No footage of her leaving. No sign of her in the stairwell, the back entrance, the side hallway near the archives. Nothing. The building has blind spots, they said. Places the cameras didn't reach. I remember standing in that security room watching the grainy footage over and over like the pixels might shift and give me something new. They never did. They searched the library top to bottom. The reading room, the basement stacks, the old staff offices on the third floor. No sign of her. No signs of a struggle. Her bag wasn't found. Neither was her notebook. The librarian on duty that day, a woman named Karen, said she remembered seeing Emily, but only in passing. She was always quiet, she told the officers. You hardly noticed her. Another staff member said the same thing. No one saw her after she entered. It was like she dissolved between the aisles. The police opened a missing persons case. Flyers went up. Local news ran a segment. 17-year-old East Providence girl vanishes without a trace. They used her school photo soft smile hair tucked behind one ear. Her eyes were clear but distant, like she was thinking about something far away. People from the neighborhood came by, offered to help search. Volunteers gathered near the library, walked the nearby streets, checked alleyways, riverbanks. Nothing. Then the theories started. A classmate claimed she'd been talking to someone online, but the police found no record of that. Someone else said she'd been acting weird, asking strange questions about the library's history. One rumor said she was pregnant. Another claimed she'd run off with a teacher. None of it held up. There was no evidence, no message, just gaps. At school, they emptied her locker. Inside were old books, a few notes, and a copy of her project proposal, Women History Forgot. The title page was neat typed, stapled in the corner. At the bottom, her English teacher had written, "Incredible topic, Emily. But be careful how deep you dig." Someone had underlined that in pen. Not Emily. The handwriting didn't match. Weeks passed, then months. The case cooled. The flyers faded. Mrs. Green, the neighbor who'd seen her at the crosswalk, said she still looked for her face in the crowd. But after a while, people stopped asking. The world kept moving. The library upgraded its lighting. They replaced the third-floor carpets. Mr. Langston, the security guard who used to wave Emily in, retired that fall. They hired someone new, younger. A lot of the old staff moved on. But I didn't. I couldn't. I kept her room exactly the same blanket on the bed, the same pen on the desk dried up and untouched. Sometimes I'd sit in her chair and try to picture what she'd written in that last journal, the one that disappeared with her. I went over every sentence she'd said that week, every glance, every moment. I kept coming back to that one thing I saw something. What did she mean? What had she seen that winter? I started requesting copies of public records, building permits, floor plans, anything connected to the library. Some of them I got. Most I didn't. One request came back stamped unavailable due to archival damage. When I called to ask, they told me there'd been flooding in the storage basement. I remember thinking how fast things disappear. Sometimes I'd dream she came back. Same scarf, same bag. But when she opened her mouth, no sound came out. Just the rustling of paper like pages turning somewhere deep underground. What stayed with me most was how quiet everything got. The way her absence didn't scream, it whispered, settled into corners, leaked under doors, like the library itself had swallowed her and gone still waiting. There was no grave to visit, no last words. Just a hallway she walked down once and never walked back out of. Then almost 20 years later, a book appeared. One she had checked out the day she vanished. Returned without a timestamp, wrapped in plastic, no fingerprints, and tucked inside between 2 pages a note. 3 words. Just 3. She knew too much. When I heard the book had been returned, my first instinct was to hang up. The reporter didn't say her name right away, just mentioned the Providence Public Library and something about a recovered item. I was halfway through deleting the voicemail when she said it. Emily. I let the message play to the end. Then I sat down and didn't move for a long time. I'd built my life around silence, moved out of state, stopped answering questions, shut the door on anything that reminded me of her. But in that one sentence, someone returned her book, it all opened back up. I didn't call the reporter back. I packed a bag and drove straight to Providence. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I couldn't ignore it. Not after 20 years. The moment I stepped back into the city, something shifted. Buildings I hadn't looked at in 2 decades. Sidewalks I used to walk with her. I didn't head to the library right away. I drove past our old duplex on Brook Street first. The brick had been painted beige. The porch railings were new. Someone else's shoes on the steps. I didn't stop. Just kept driving until the stone facade of the library came into view. I parked 3 blocks away and walked the rest heart tight in my throat. Inside, everything looked different and exactly the same. New security desk, brighter lighting. But the air still had that same weight, like something old was sitting just out of sight. A young woman behind the counter looked up as I entered. Brown hair in a loose bun. Sharp eyes. "Mr. Whitlow," she asked. "I'm Camille." She led me to a back room past stacks of books and a door marked "Staff Only." On the table inside was a sealed plastic bag. Inside it, the book. Hardback. Black cover. Title still legible. 10 Days in a Madhouse. It looked untouched. Camille waited as I opened the bag, my hands colder than they should have been. I didn't need to flip through it. I remembered the title. She'd been obsessed with that story, Nellie Bly, the journalist who pretended to be insane to expose the asylum system. Emily had written about her in one of those journals. She said bravery wasn't about shouting, it was about not looking away. I didn't say anything. Camille pulled something from her coat pocket and placed it gently on the table. "This was inside," she said. A folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, creased 4 ways. I opened it. 3 words. She knew too much. I didn't react, not on the outside. But I felt something hollow open in my chest. Not grief, not fear. Recognition, like a door that had been closed for 20 years was still unlocked after all. I asked her where the book had been found. She said it came through the return bin early morning. No timestamp, no camera footage, nothing in the system. As far as the database knew, the book had never come back. She told me she hadn't shown the note to anyone but me. I wasn't sure who to trust, she said. I nodded. I didn't trust anyone either. The next morning, I returned to the library. Camille met me at the door quieter this time. Something about the way she looked around before unlocking the staff room told me she was starting to feel it too, that creeping sense that something old was watching. She handed me a printout. It was from the return logs. My sister's borrower record had been flagged as deactivated due to missing person status. There was no scan of the book's return, no barcode registered. It just appeared. I asked Camille if anything else had gone missing lately. She hesitated, then said a box of archival records from 2005 had vanished from the basement. It was there last week, she said. Now it's gone. Her supervisor had chalked it up to disorganization, but Camille didn't believe that. Neither did I. That afternoon, a local journalist named Marissa Langley reached out. She'd grown up in Providence, remembered the case. Said someone forwarded her a copy of the library's inquiry to the police. She'd already pulled floor plans, started tracing staff records, and requested access to microfilm. But when she showed up at the library asking to see the May-June 2005 reels, an intern told her the machine was down. The reel was missing. Discontinued use, he said. She didn't buy it. She thought someone didn't want her looking. And when she said that, I knew exactly what she meant. That night, Camille called me. Her voice was shaky. Someone went through my desk, she said. Nothing was stolen, just rearranged, moved slightly, as if someone wanted her to know they'd been there. In the break room that morning, she'd found a photocopy of the same note. She knew too much. Printed in large block letters. No one admitted to placing it there. No one said anything. The room went silent when she walked in. Camille asked me if she was overreacting. I told her no. 2 days later, news broke that Leo Danvers had been found dead in his apartment. He'd been the janitor at the library in 2005. Official report said heart attack. But neighbors told a different story. Loud banging the night before, raised voices, then silence. No signs of forced entry. No autopsy requested. That same week, a fire alarm went off on the 3rd floor of the library. No smoke. Just an electrical short near the old reading area right where Emily used to sit. Maintenance said the alarm system had never malfunctioned before. I stopped sleeping. Every night I sat at the window watching the street, not waiting for her, just listening. I'd spent 20 years burying questions, but now they were digging themselves back up. The book, the note, the missing records, none of it made sense unless someone wanted to be found, or wanted someone else to stop looking. That's when Camille told me about Elliot Morrow. Said he'd worked at the library back then. Said he'd shown up after the book was returned. Quiet, worn, still limping from an old injury. She introduced us the next morning. He didn't speak right away. Just stared at the evidence bag, his eyes clouded but sharp. When I asked if he remembered Emily, he nodded. She read like it was urgent, he said. I asked him if he ever talked to her. A few times, he said. She asked a lot of questions. I asked what kind. He didn't answer, just looked at the book again. I asked if he'd seen anything that day. He said no. But his voice caught slightly when he said it. I didn't push. Not yet. Camille watched the whole exchange. Later, she told me there was something about the way Elliot carried himself, as if he was waiting for someone to ask the right question. Marissa called again that night. She said she'd been combing through old public records and found something strange. An early draft of the library floor plan from 2005 included a corridor that wasn't in the current blueprint, a narrow passage behind the 3rd floor nonfiction stacks. Sealed during renovations, no longer marked. Might have just been storage, she said, but it's not listed anywhere now. I asked her to send it to me. When I opened the file, my stomach turned. The corridor ran parallel to the spot where Emily always sat. The same place the alarm had gone off. I called Camille. She didn't answer at first. Then she picked up and said I was just thinking about that corner. There's something off about it. I didn't know it yet, but we were standing right on the edge. The truth hadn't come into view, but the shape of it was beginning to show. The book had come back. The silence was cracking, and somewhere inside that building, something long buried was getting ready to speak. The days that followed were slow in the way only buried things can be quiet on the surface, but moving just beneath it. Camille started showing up to work earlier than she needed to. She said she felt better being there first before anyone else walked through the doors. Her movements got sharper. She didn't linger in the break room anymore, kept her badge around her neck even on lunch. One morning she found her desk drawer open. Nothing missing, just the arrangement slightly off, the kind of off that doesn't shout, but hums in the back of your neck. A few sheets shuffled, a highlighter placed the wrong way. She closed the drawer without saying a word. But that same afternoon, she handed me a manila envelope with my name in small, careful handwriting. Inside was a copy of the building's original blueprints dated 2005. She pointed to a narrow passage behind the third-floor stacks lined up with the window Emily used to sit near. It was marked as a service corridor. It wasn't on the modern layout. Around the same time, Marissa and I met for the first time. She picked a small diner just off Hope Street. It was raining lightly when I walked in. She already had papers spread across the table, floor plans, news clippings, a copy of Emily's missing person file. She didn't waste time with introductions. Just said, "I think your sister saw something in that building, and I think someone made sure she never spoke about it." She didn't blink when she said it. Just handed me a printout. It was a scanned document, Emily's project proposal. I'd never seen the original. Her handwriting in the margins answering a note from her teacher. At the bottom, circled twice. "That's why I want to tell them." I read it, and I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Marissa slid another paper across the table, a photocopy of the same 3 words from the note in the book. We sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be explained. That night, Camille stayed late, said she was doing inventory. She waited until the building had emptied out. She didn't tell anyone, took the blueprints from her bag and traced the path carefully. She followed the line from the north stairwell to a wall that had been recently patched during renovations. The plaster didn't match. She said later the air felt different there, stale, like it hadn't moved in years. She ran her hand along the molding, found a loose panel near the floor. Inside was a recessed space too shallow for storage. But wedged deep in the back was something soft cloth, weathered, folded. She pulled it out slowly. It was a journal. Small, bound in fabric. A pressed flower tucked inside the front cover, dried and delicate, its color mostly gone. And behind that, an envelope with 2 letters on the flap, E.H. She didn't open it. She didn't touch the pages. She slipped both into her bag and left the building without turning off the lights. She called me from the sidewalk. Her voice was steady, but it was the kind of steady that only holds when you're trying not to crack. I met her near the staff entrance. We didn't speak until we got to my car. She handed me the journal. I recognized it right away. Emily had a dozen of them, kept them in a box under her bed, but this one had gone missing the day she disappeared. I turned the pages carefully. Her handwriting hadn't changed. It was neat, small, and deliberate. Most of the entries were dated that spring. They started with research notes, names of women in journalism, dates, citations. Then they shifted, more personal. She wrote about someone named Douglas Keene, said he'd been a former director at the library, left abruptly after quiet settlements. She didn't say why, but she suspected it had to do with meetings being held after hours. She'd seen him enter the service corridor, once with Leo Danvers. Wrote that he handed Leo a black envelope, that Leo looked scared. The final entry was short. "I'm going to ask Elliot. He was there that night. He knows something. I can feel it." I read that page 3 times. Then I closed the book and looked out the windshield, but I didn't really see anything. Camille sat next to me without speaking. When I finally looked at her, she just said, "There's more. I think someone else knew. Maybe still does." The next morning, Marissa met Elliot in the reading room. She didn't confront him. Not directly, just said she'd been looking into the old floor plans, that she knew about the corridor, that she knew about Keene. Elliot didn't look surprised. Just said, "I've been waiting for this." He admitted that Emily had come to him, that she'd told him about what she saw. He'd told her to stop, told her to leave it alone. She didn't. When Marissa asked why he never told anyone, he said something that stuck with me, because she asked me not to. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope, said he'd been holding on to it for 20 years, said he never opened it, said he couldn't. The letter inside was folded twice, still crisp along the edges. It was hers. I didn't need to read more than the first line to know that. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Please tell Aaron. I'm sorry I didn't tell him everything. I wanted to finish what I started. Douglas Keene is dangerous. He's not acting alone. There's something in the archives room, something he's keeping there. I don't know what, but someone should look. I don't remember much after that. Just the sound of her handwriting in my head. The way she said my name on paper, like she still thought someone might listen. Marissa and I exchanged a glance. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. We went back through the building's access logs, trying to trace entry to the archives room. It had always been locked. Even in 2005, only senior staff had keys. The logs were thin. Some records were gone, others redacted. But one thing stood out, a list of unusual entries labeled under a generic time slot: staff training. Always the same room. Always Tuesday nights. Room 213. I asked Camille if that room still existed. She frowned, said she'd never seen it. Maybe it had been repurposed. She pulled out a set of building keys and we checked. There was no door marked 213. Not anymore. But at the far end of the second floor, behind an unplugged vending machine and a row of storage bins, we found a seam in the drywall. The paint was newer there, the surface slightly uneven. She ran her hand across the edge. Soft give. We got a crowbar from maintenance, broke through the paneling slowly. Inside was a narrow office, no windows. Faint mildew on the walls, a sag in the ceiling. But in the far corner, half buried in dust, was something small and metallic. I knelt and picked it up. A necklace. Silver. Worn. A tiny compass on the chain. I remembered it instantly. I gave it to her for her 12th birthday. "So you never get lost," I'd said. She wore it every day after that. I didn't say anything. Just held it in my hand until the dust on my fingers clung to the tears I didn't feel coming. Camille didn't speak either. She just stepped back and let me stay there for as long as I needed. Later, when we left that room, we locked the door behind us, not to hide what we'd found, but to mark that something had been broken open, something that couldn't be sealed again. Emily had been there, in that room, and now we knew for sure she hadn't walked away. Something had stopped her, and someone had helped make sure we'd never find out. Until now. The next morning started quiet, like nothing had changed. But everything had. I left the necklace on Emily's desk, right where her journal used to sit, and pulled the curtains open to let in some light. The house had gone too long without air. I stood in the doorway for a while, looking at the walls she'd once taped notes to tiny pieces of trivia and quotes from obscure books. She used to say they helped her think, helped her connect things. I'd pulled most of them down years ago, but a few still clung to the edges of her corkboard, faded and curling. The stillness in that room didn't feel like peace. It felt like waiting. I met Marissa again that afternoon. She'd been digging through city permits and archived documents trying to track down what that hidden office had once been. Room 213 had been listed on old blueprints as a staff lounge, but that designation disappeared sometime around 2006. No mention of its removal, no updated floor plans, nothing official. She pulled a small notepad from her coat and flipped to a list of dates, names, and entry logs. Every Tuesday, she said. Room 213 was scheduled under DK. I didn't need to ask who that was. Douglas Keene. She looked up from the page and said May 17th. That was the last day Emily was seen. I didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say. That evening, Marissa visited Camille at the library. They went over floor access logs and time-stamped staff entries. Camille pointed out something strange. Every entry for room 213 had a staff access code tied to a name that hadn't been used in over a decade. Most of the logs had been archived or scrubbed, but a few remained in the back end of the database. Camille said she shouldn't have been able to find them at all. The system was supposed to purge them after 10 years. She printed them anyway and made copies. That night, someone triggered her car alarm at 1:11 in the morning. The car wasn't damaged, nothing stolen. But inside, on the driver's seat, was a torn notebook page. It read, "Not everyone wants the truth found." The next day, Marissa went to the Providence Hall of Records. She requested blueprints for the library dating back to the early 2000s. The clerk at the desk gave her a flat look and said the archives had been water damaged years ago. Most of the old storage basement flooded in 2009, he told her. Some are legible, some aren't. He didn't offer to help. She asked anyway. They walked down a long corridor, buzzing with fluorescent lights until they reached a locked room filled with damp boxes. It smelled like old cardboard and mildew. She pulled the one labeled Prov Lib 2005 off the shelf. Half the contents were missing. But inside, near the bottom, she found something that hadn't been listed anywhere else, a hand-sketched diagram. It showed a secondary corridor running alongside the reading room, the same area where the fire alarm had gone off, a space that didn't exist on any of the current floor plans. While she was doing that, I met with Mrs. Rayburn, Emily's former English teacher. She'd retired a few years earlier, but still lived in town. Her house was small, warm, filled with books. She poured tea into mismatched mugs and said she thought about Emily every May. I handed her a copy of the note. She knew too much. She didn't ask where it came from, just looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "Emily told me once there was a room in the library no one talked about. She said it was usually locked. Said she saw a man go in and never come out." I asked if she described him. She nodded. She said he wasn't supposed to be there. Back at the library, Camille brought the staff incident binder to Joanna Ricks, the library director, and told her about the note left in her car. Joanna didn't seem concerned. "Someone's playing games," she said. "This is a public building. Anyone could have found that book." When Camille asked about room 213, Joanna stiffened slightly. "That room was closed during the renovation," she said. "We sealed it years ago." Camille asked why it was still on the logs. Joanna told her to stop wasting time. Then she told her to stay out of the security system. That night, Marissa called me. She had traced the library's staff rotation back to 2005 and noticed a name that appeared frequently in the same time slot as Keene's entries, Leo Danvers. She was certain Leo knew more than he ever said. But now, he was gone. Official cause: heart failure. Neighbors mentioned a loud argument the night before he died. No one followed up. No autopsy, just a closed case. We met at the diner again. The same booth, the same soft rain tapping at the windows. She laid out the blueprint copy, her notes, the partial logs. "There's something behind that wall," she said, "and I don't think it's just boxes and broken furniture." I told her about the corridor, about the necklace, about the journal. She took it all in slowly. Then she said, "She kept a record. If she hid one thing, she might have hidden more." I nodded. "If we find that journal, her last one, then maybe we'll finally know what she saw." That night, Camille stayed late again. This time, she didn't pretend to do inventory. She waited until the last staff member left, then made her way to the old north stairwell. It had been sealed during renovations, but recently reopened for storage. She carried a flashlight and a printed copy of Marissa's diagram. She followed the path down the corridor, past broken light fixtures and dust-covered pipes until she reached a rusted metal door. A faded plaque hung askew, staff records. Restricted access. The lock was old. Camille pulled a bobby pin from her hair and worked the mechanism. It gave way with a tired click. The room smelled of dust and varnish. Filing cabinets lined the far wall, most of them dented or stuck shut. A single desk lamp sat on a table near the back. Behind it, a tall bookshelf slightly off from the floor. She crouched and ran her fingers along the base. One panel shifted under pressure. She pulled at it gently until it came loose. Behind it, tucked in the hollow space, was another journal, cloth-bound, worn. Inside was a pressed flower, same as the others, and next to it, a folded envelope with the initials E.H. Camille didn't read it. She put it in her coat pocket and left the building without turning off the light. She called me as soon as she got outside, said the journal was real, said she had it in her hands. I didn't answer right away. I just listened to the wind through the phone. It sounded like it had the night she disappeared, cold, steady, and carrying something with it. She said, "There's something written in there about Keen, about Leo, and something about a place called the Archives Room." She thought they were keeping something there. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She said, "She wrote it all down. It's still here." Then she paused and added, "Aaron, she was never just guessing. She knew, and I believed her, because deep down I think I always had." The journal sat between us on the kitchen table unopened. Camille hadn't read past the final page she skimmed before calling. The envelope was still tucked inside the back cover, sealed heavier than it should have been. I didn't touch it for a long time. I just kept my eyes on that familiar binding, the one with the frayed corner she used to fiddle with when she was thinking. The kitchen light flickered above us. Camille's hands were folded tight in her lap. She said, "It's all there, what she saw, what she suspected." She was closer than anyone realized. I nodded once, then opened the cover and started reading. Her handwriting hadn't changed. Each entry was clear and careful, her sentences deliberate. At first it was notes, dates, questions, things she overheard in the hallways. But then it shifted. She was watching people following patterns. She'd noticed a man mid-50s tall wore a gray overcoat and never checked out books. She saw him enter the staff corridor 3 times. Once with Leo. Another time with Joanna, who at the time was just a junior staffer. The 3rd time she didn't see who followed him in, only that he locked the door behind him. The name Keen showed up in the margins more than once. She'd underlined it, capitalized it. Then there was the note she wrote in bold. Leo looked scared. The next morning I brought the journal to Marissa. She laid out her research alongside it, personnel lists, anonymous complaints, internal memos she'd pulled from digitized archives. We sat in the reading room just past the stairwell where the light always hummed faintly. She read in silence for 20 minutes before pointing to a passage. This one. She saw Keen pass Leo something in an envelope. And then she wrote, "They said the files are a liability. I heard them through the vent." Marissa reached into her tote bag and pulled out a stapled report. It was a copy of a disciplinary hearing dated 2003, redacted in several places, but the bottom corner still had a name, Keen. Most of these complaints were dismissed or sealed, she said. But there's a pattern. Youth programming, one-on-one mentorships, vague language, no follow-up, and every time someone filed something substantial, it was handled internally. She showed me another line. Outcome resolved without escalation. Same phrase over and over. The next step wasn't something we planned exactly. It felt more like something we were drawn into. Camille found the access key to the archive room. She said it had been left in the director's office, safe forgotten or ignored. Elliot had mentioned it once in passing, but never said he'd held on to a copy. Now Camille did. The door was heavier than I expected, steel-reinforced thick, the kind of door you install when you want to keep things out or in. Inside, the air was dry and heavy. Rows of unlabeled boxes sat on metal shelving units, some still sealed, others buckled from weight and time. A few old microfilm reels lay scattered across a cabinet covered in dust. Toward the back was a corkboard warped at the edges with dozens of yellow documents pinned to it, clippings, maps, meeting notes. At the center was a school photo of Emily, not the one used in the missing posters, a different one cropped close, pinned with a rusted tack. I didn't move at first. I just stared. Marissa walked slowly along the wall, scanning the notes. There were names: Keene, Danvers, Joanna. Red thread connected them across a map of Providence, tracing lines between buildings, community centers, old shelters. A few addresses were circled in pen. She reached for a box marked EH. It wasn't locked. Inside was the notebook. The missing one, the final one. It picked up exactly where the journal Camille found had left off. Emily had been making copies, scanning documents. She wrote about how she overheard Keene pressuring Leo to destroy files. She made notes about their language, how they spoke in vague terms, careful but never cautious enough. One line read, "They said they couldn't risk this reaching outside, that everything would collapse." Then she wrote, "I hid a copy, just in case." We tore the room apart. Hours passed. Boxes opened. Shelves shifted. Dust thickened on our clothes. And then, under a battered desk bolted to the far wall, Marissa found a false floor panel cracked at one corner. Beneath it was a waterproof envelope taped shut with a flash drive inside. It didn't look like much. Just an old 5x12 Mitsubishi stick, scratched and scuffed. But when Camille loaded the contents onto a laptop, the screen filled with scanned documents. Dozens of them. Internal memos, settlement agreements, program evaluations, all tied to Keene and his so-called mentorship initiative. Some names were blacked out, others weren't. There were signatures. There were dates. And at the bottom of one report, typed clearly and without redaction, was the name Joanna Ricks. Not as a victim, not as a witness, as an approver. I stood there staring at the screen and felt something in my chest settle into place. A kind of clarity, heavy and quiet. Emily hadn't stumbled onto something. She hadn't made wild guesses or chased shadows. She'd documented everything. She'd been deliberate, and they knew it. They didn't just ignore her. They erased her. Camille stepped back and rubbed her arms like the cold had finally caught up to her. Marissa crouched by the file boxes again and pulled one final slip from a drawer that wouldn't close properly. It was handwritten dates and times each Tuesday evening, same as the logs, all listed under room 213. At the bottom, a scribbled note. No program ever scheduled. Confirmed with staff. Lights always off. Marissa turned it over and showed me the reverse side. It was blank except for one small corner where Emily had written, "He told me not to go back. I said I wouldn't. But I did." The flashlight beam flickered once, and Camille tapped it to keep the light steady. We packed everything into a single box, drives, copies, notes. Marissa locked the archive door behind us. None of us spoke until we were out on the sidewalk. The wind had picked up again. It was the kind that carried grit in the air, dry and restless. Camille looked at me and said, she knew exactly what she was doing. I nodded. Then I told her something I hadn't said out loud until that moment. She didn't disappear. They made her disappear. And now, we had the pieces to show it. But what we didn't know yet, what none of us could have guessed, was just how deep it would go, or how many more names were still buried in those files. Somewhere behind every signature and every redacted line there was still one more door left unopened. And Emily had left us the key. We didn't go to the police right away, not because we doubted what we had, there was no doubt anymore, but because we already knew what would happen. Camille had filed a report the day the book came back months earlier and never got a reply. Now we had Emily's final journal, the flash drive, the floor plan. No one could explain the hidden room that no longer officially existed. But we also had a list of names, people who'd been there, people still working, people who had access. And once we opened that door, we wouldn't be able to close it again. So we made copies. Marissa scanned everything, encrypted the files, and backed them up to 3 separate drives. She mailed one to her sister in another state, handed one to me, and gave the last to Camille. If anything happens, she said, don't wait. That night, she published the first episode of her podcast. It was called The Truth Emily Knew. She didn't start with the conspiracy. She started with the girl, the voice that no one listened to. She walked through the timeline with quiet care. How Emily had vanished, how her book came back, how the investigation never really started. She played the audio of the page being turned in the journal, the soft shuffle of dried petals falling from the binding. By morning, the episode had over 12,000 downloads. By the end of the week, it had passed 100,000. Someone posted a link on a public forum for cold cases. Then another showed up in a teacher's group chat. A librarian in New Jersey left a comment that read, "This sounds familiar." Another from Oregon said, "We had someone like her too." Then came the message that shifted everything. It was anonymous, no subject line, no signature, just one sentence. She wasn't the only one. The next day, we saw our first news camera outside the library. Not local, national. The reporter said they were following up on a resurfaced missing persons case now linked to internal misconduct and sealed records. They asked to speak to Joanna. She didn't appear. By the afternoon, the Providence Public Library had issued a formal statement. We are aware of renewed attention regarding a 2005 disappearance. At this time, we are cooperating fully with authorities. But we knew what that meant. The board had retained counsel. Everything was going through legal. The walls were going up. Joanna was suspended within 48 hours of the first episode going viral. Officially, it was administrative leave. Unofficially, she'd been told to stay quiet. Camille said the atmosphere at the library changed overnight. Staff avoided eye contact. Old coworkers stopped speaking. She found her locker emptied one morning. No one knew who did it. Her phone started acting strange static during calls, battery draining in minutes. One night, her apartment was broken into. Nothing taken, just drawers opened, files scattered, her laptop wiped. The backup drive she'd stored in a locked cabinet was gone. That same week, Marissa's car alarm was triggered twice in one night. The second time, a message was written in red marker across her rear windshield. 2 words. Walk away. She didn't. She published episode 2 the next morning. This time she named names. Keene, Danvers, the youth mentorship program, the signatures, the sealed complaints. And for the first time she said what we'd all been avoiding, that there had been a system in place, not just a few people, not a single failure. A system that protected itself by silencing the ones who saw too much. I went to Joanna's house the day after that, not to accuse her, to ask her to explain. She didn't answer the first 2 times I knocked. The third time, the door opened just a few inches. Her voice was tight. "You shouldn't be here. I said you signed those approvals." She stared past me. "I didn't know what they were." I shook my head. "That's not true." Her voice cracked. "I was 25, new to the system. I was told not to ask questions. I didn't want to lose everything." I said, "You lost her." She nodded once, then closed the door. I stood there for a while, the kind of stillness that makes you feel hollow from the inside out. Camille resigned that Friday. She said it wasn't for show. She just didn't feel safe anymore. Her apartment had been entered a second time. No sign of forced entry. Her phone began glitching whenever she tried to call Marissa. So she walked into the director's office, handed in her badge, and left the library without looking back. But she didn't leave empty-handed. That night, she dropped a manila envelope on my porch. Inside was a copy of Emily's last full journal, neatly printed and annotated in Camille's handwriting, cross-referenced against the timeline Marissa had built from recovered documents. At the bottom of the last page, Camille had written one sentence. She was the bravest person I never met. 6 days later, Elliot Morrow died. Heart failure. His obituary was short. No surviving family. A handful of former staff attended the memorial. I sat in the back, didn't speak to anyone. After the service, the funeral director handed me a sealed envelope. "He asked for this to be given to you," he said. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No date, no greeting, just his words written in his heavy, uneven hand. I failed her. I saw the smoke, and I looked away. I let her walk into it alone. If I believed in forgiveness, I'd ask for it. But I don't. I just hope you do better than I did. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. I didn't go home that night. I drove north across the state line through the dark until the trees thickened and the road narrowed to gravel. I stopped at a park we used to visit when we were little near a lake where the water always stayed still. I walked to the edge and sat there for a long time. I opened an old shoebox I'd carried with me for years. Inside were the necklace, the copy of her journal, and a photo of us from before the accident, both of us smiling, both of us still whole. I held the compass in my hand and remembered what I'd told her the day I gave it to her. So you never get lost again. And for the first time in 2 decades, I let myself cry. Not the kind of tears you can push away. Not grief shaped like guilt, but the kind that comes when the silence finally cracks and something that's been waiting beneath it finds the air. The truth was no longer a question. It was a shape now built from evidence and names and timelines. But justice still felt like a stranger standing on the far side of a locked door, and we hadn't even knocked yet. We were just now reaching for the key. It started moving faster after that. The podcast reached its 3rd episode, and by then it had its own subreddit, its own review column, its own small army of listeners posting timelines and theories like they were detectives themselves. But for the 3 of us, Marissa, Camille, and me, none of it felt like momentum. It felt like weight. Camille had stopped answering calls from unfamiliar numbers. Marissa no longer walked alone after dark. And I had started to expect that every envelope in my mailbox might contain a warning. But none of us stopped. Not because we felt safe, because we knew what was coming. The pressure shifted when a second librarian stepped forward, someone who had worked in the building from 2003 to 2006 and had been quietly following the podcast. She didn't want her name made public. But she confirmed everything that Keene ran his own programs, that staff knew to avoid room 213 after hours, that questions about mentorship access were handled off the books. She said the library board kept 2 versions of most documents, one for public use and one stored in what she called the gray file. That was the first time we'd heard that term. The gray file wasn't on a drive. It wasn't on paper. It was word-of-mouth whisper chains, internal knowledge passed along like a shadow no one wanted to touch. She told Marissa where to look and what to look for. The next day, Marissa went back to the archives room. She knew what to search now, not just names, but the patterns behind them. Files labeled community engagement that never listed participants. Budget requests with no matching event. Donations from organizations that didn't exist in state records. She found a logbook nearly forgotten with years of entry codes recorded in a tight column. Many had been blacked out with marker, but someone had pressed hard when they wrote. She shaded over them lightly with a pencil and the numbers reappeared. One code repeated more than any other. She traced it back. It belonged to Keene. The dates lined up with the last weeks Emily was alive. The same Tuesday time slot, the same room. By then, local media had finally caught up. Journalists started calling it the library case, which felt wrong somehow, like they'd shrunk Emily into a headline. They ran pieces with old photos and partial interviews, but none of them touched the deeper story. No one mentioned the files. No one said the words abuse or cover-up, and still no action came from law enforcement. The precinct claimed they were reviewing new evidence, but when Marissa called the officer on duty, didn't ask for the flash drive. Didn't take her name. Didn't ask to meet. Just told her to send what she had if she wanted. That night, her apartment was broken into for the second time. Nothing stolen. But on her bathroom mirror, written in red marker, were 2 more words. Time's up. That was the final line. She packed a bag, handed me a drive, gave another to Camille, and scheduled the 4th episode. But this time, she didn't publish it through a platform. She uploaded it to a public archive, sent the link to newsrooms, to university forums, to survivors groups. Then she spoke. Clear, slow, factual. She named the documents. She quoted from the journal. She named Joanna. She named Keene. She described the layout of room 213. She listed the evidence on the flash drive. And then she said Emily Hewitt was not lost. She was buried. The next morning, it was everywhere. 2 former board members came forward anonymously to verify the existence of the mentorship program. They admitted there were concerns raised about Keene's involvement, but claimed that senior administration chose to handle matters internally. Neither named who made that decision. But their statements were enough to trigger a deeper look. By the end of the week, the Rhode Island Attorney General's office issued a statement saying they were conducting a preliminary review of the documents. That was the most we'd heard from any official body since the case was reopened. Joanna didn't respond to interview requests, but we saw her once outside her townhouse, pacing near her garden wall. She looked thinner, older. The press was camped a block away. She ignored them. That same night, someone posted a scanned letter on the forum tied to the podcast. It was dated June 2005, signed by Joanna, addressed to a member of the library's finance committee. It was short, 3 paragraphs, and it approved an increase in discretionary funding for Keene's outreach program. That letter hadn't been among our files. Whoever posted it never claimed ownership. The account was deleted minutes later. But the damage was done. The ripple had turned into something else, something too wide to control. More messages came in, some anonymous. Some from people who said they remembered Emily, a boy from her English class, a former substitute teacher, a woman who worked at a shelter Emily had once visited for a project. Each one added a piece, but one stood out. It was short. No greeting, no punctuation. Just this. She came to me the week before she disappeared. She asked if I knew what he was doing. I told her to keep her head down. She said she couldn't. She said someone had to say it out loud. That same night, Camille called me. She said the library had issued a new staff memo, one that made no mention of the podcast, no mention of Emily, but reminded all personnel to maintain discretion regarding past programming. The language was cold, sanitized, but the meaning was clear. They were closing ranks. She asked if I thought they'd actually change anything. I told her I didn't know. The truth was already out. But justice, that was something else, something slower, something that didn't answer when you knocked. The flash drive was entered into public evidence. A lawyer contacted Marissa, offering to help secure protections for the files. She agreed. We kept backups anyway, just in case. The city issued a statement pledging to review historical practices within municipal libraries. It meant nothing. But still, Emily's name was finally being spoken again. Not as a case, not as a headline, but as a person. A girl who asked questions. A girl who wrote everything down because she knew no one would listen until the writing was all that was left. And yet even now, after all of it, there was still one piece missing. One thing she mentioned in that letter Elliot had saved. A reference to something deeper, something hidden in the archives. She didn't say what it was, only that it mattered, that it was the reason she kept going, and the reason they couldn't let her leave. I went back to the library that night. Not inside, just across the street. I sat in my car, headlights off, watching the third-floor window where her light used to burn late into the evening. That was where she'd read, where she'd written, where she'd disappeared. The window was dark, but I stayed anyway, because I wasn't sure if I'd ever come back, and because I knew we weren't done. Not yet. The plaque outside the library is small, bronze weathered a little now from the coastal air. It sits under the second column from the left-right where the sun hits in the morning. It doesn't say much, just her name and 3 lines, a reader, a writer, a seeker of truth. Let no story be buried. Some people pause when they walk past. Most don't. But that's all right. It's not about the foot traffic. It's about the fact that it's there. That after all those years, she's not just a rumor or a file or a question no one wanted to answer. She's real. Still here. Still speaking. The library changed after that. Not overnight. Not loudly. But it changed. Room 213 was torn out during renovations. The archives room was digitized. Staff policies were rewritten. And while some faces quietly disappeared, others stayed and began again. Camille moved to Vermont not long after. Bought a little bookstore near the edge of town. She keeps a framed photo of Emily behind the counter. Says it reminds her why stories matter, why records matter. She told me once that every time a young girl comes in asking for a biography, she watches the way they turn the pages. It helps her sleep a little better. Marissa kept the podcast going. The truth. Emily knew became more than a single story. It became a starting point. Other families began to reach out. Other names surfaced. Some cold cases reopened. Some never got that far. But what mattered was the shift, the feeling that silence wasn't the final word anymore. She won a few awards that year. But the thing she talks about most is an email from a girl in Indiana, 14. Said her sister had vanished 3 years earlier. Said after hearing Emily's story, she wasn't giving up. Marissa printed that message, taped it beside her desk. Then she wrote back. Joanna never spoke again in public. Last I heard, she moved down south. No interviews, no statements, no denials. The library board issued a formal apology the following spring. No names, no charges. But the files are public now. The flash drive's contents archived in 3 different databases. Anyone who wants to know what happened can find it. Nothing was redacted. Not anymore. As for me, I stayed. I reopened Emily's room. I didn't change much. Didn't need to. I just repainted the walls, opened the windows, let the light in again. I placed her necklace on the desk and next to it one of her earliest journals. Not the one that held evidence. Not the one where the fear started to show. The first one. The one she got on her 9th birthday. Inside the cover, in her round little handwriting, she wrote, "Someday I'm going to change something." And she did. A year passed, then another. I got a job at a local youth center, mentorship tutoring mostly. Nothing big, just steady. I don't talk about her much there. But when a kid asks why I do what I do, I tell them, because one voice can change everything. And I believe that. I believe it because I saw what happened when one voice refused to be quiet, when she saw something wrong and didn't flinch, when she put it in writing even though she knew it might cost her everything. Every May 18th. I still get a letter. No return address. No signature. Just a single line typed or handwritten or printed. This year's read, "Some stories don't want to be told, but some refuse to stay silent." I keep them all in a box. The same one I once used for her keepsakes. I don't know who sends them. I don't need to. If you're still here, if you listened all the way through, thank you. Not just for hearing the facts, but for holding space for her. for remembering her as more than a case. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it. Not for clicks, not for numbers, just so no name, no voice gets left behind again. That's all she wanted, that someone would listen. And now, someone did.